Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 248 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us. We apologize for the missed week last week, but we're back this week with all your latest boxing news, reviews, and previews. Jumping straight back into it, fight reviews this past Saturday, the 23rd of September from the Wembley Arena in London, England on ESPN+. A rematch, a heavyweight matchup from, I think, earlier this year, or was it last year? We'll touch on it in a second. But same matchup, same result. Zhilei Zhang, I think I'm pronouncing it right. I think last time I said Zhilei Zhang. I think it's Zhilei Zhang gets the third round knockout over Joe Joyce, who now has the second loss of his career. All two losses in his career so far are to Zhilei Zhang. This was for the WBO Interim Heavyweight Championship of the World. Zhang caught him with a nice right hook, essentially. The first fight that they had earlier was a TKO, and this one was a straight knockout. I mean, what did you think? Did you think that a lot of people were obviously surprised in the first fight? Were you on the camp that thought, oh, okay, in the second fight, Joyce is gonna figure it out, and they're gonna end up probably having a trilogy later on? What did you think?
No, he had to change too much. You know, everyone seemed to just go to the fact that he came in too light, and if he had a bit more weight about him, you know, his punches would be heavier, and he would be able to absorb and maybe the punches a little bit better. But it was a lot of it was head movement. You know, there was literally no head movement. He was just a sitting duck. And so far in his career, you know, against, you know, lesser opposition, he's been able to walk through them, you know, like Homer Simpson style. You know, they would just punch him and kind of like wear themselves out by punching him in the face so many times. Pardon me. But yeah, I mean, there was too much to change in a short period of time, I thought, for, you know, him to really, really beat Zhang. And, you know, unfortunately, that was the case. You know, Zhang just seemed quicker than him. Zhang just seems to be a bigger version of Joe Joyce. He's like a bigger juggernaut. He's just bigger, wider, absorbs the punches, looks like he's faster than him, does the fundamentals a little bit better than Joe Joyce does. And yeah, you know, all respect for him to getting back in there and, you know, facing him, because, you know, the first time round it was pretty clinical. And like a lot of rematches, the same person won, but they normally do it in better style because they've already beat them. They already have that confidence. And that's exactly what happened here. You know, it was good to see that he was, you know, well afterwards, and you know, he kind of said, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna come back, and you can't really put it down to age. Zhang's actually older than Joe Joyce.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, they both came to the you know, the pro ranks, you know, later part of their career. You know, and so far they've had some good matchups, and you know, going forward for Zhang, he's got two big fights probably to pick from. You know, if you're looking for some, you know, big fights. Doing either Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury at the Bird's Nest in China. You know how the Chinese love like those huge sports stars, you know, guys that are really tall, guys that look like an Adonis. Joshua or Fury going over to China, fighting in the Bird's Nest, make it one of those, you know, New Year's Eve fights like they like to do. They always do like a big card, don't they, of martial arts on New Year's Eve. Tends to be a tradition over there. Imagine the pay-per-view numbers for that. It'd be absolutely astronomical, the payday for Tyson or AJ.
Who do you think out of those potential scenarios with either of those heavyweights that you mentioned right now, who's the most likely candidate to step into the ring with Zhilei Zhang in China, if it happens in China? Because you're right, there's a ton of money there, regardless of whatever you may think about China's economy, politics. They're huge. They got a ton of money. Pacquiao has fought over there, obviously. I think he fought Brandon Rios over there, and I think Algieri too. And there's a big payday. I mean, they're going to Saudi Arabia and the Middle East to get the money, and China, I'm sure, can dish it out as well. And you're right. The Chinese people and the country would love to see one of their own in action, especially in boxing. I mean, when's the last time you've had somebody, of Chinese descent kind of make some sort of an impact in the boxing world? I think it's been a while. And if you can bring Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua or even like a Deontay Wilder to China, I think that's pretty big. But who do you think out of all those names I just mentioned, or any of the more, I guess, financially prominent heavyweights, who would have the most increased chance of actually following through with a bout like that in the country of China?
Tyson Fury now, Zhilei Zhang, I believe, has options, or Frank Warren has options with Zhilei Zhang because of that card that they just fought on was obviously a Frank Warren card. So, I think he has a couple of fights options with him, so that fight would be easy to make. We know Tyson Fury loves to have big, easy paydays. When he fought Chisora, he's obviously fighting Ngannou, which is pretty much an exhibition. So he could quickly turn that around, I guess, if they wanted to do that on New Year's Eve and fight someone like a Zhilei Zhang, because, what is China, like 2 billion population, something like that? So,
it's huge.
A well-priced pay-per-view over there could make you an ungodly amount of money. And they just love huge sports stars. You remember like Bob Sapp went over there and used to fight in combat sports. Like all the bodybuilders, if you watch those documentaries, they go over there. They're looked at like gods because they just love like huge, muscular, stars. So, having someone like Zhang, who is, one of their own, I'm sure he can make a crazy amount of money going in there with someone like a global superstar like AJ or Tyson Fury.
Yeah. There's a ton of money on the table. Like you said, sometimes foreign athletes who go over there, they make a second career. You mentioned those names. There's another name in the NBA here in the United States. He's retired now, but he was a basketball player. His name was Stephon Marbury. He had a great career in the United States playing for different teams for, I don't know, over a decade or more or something like that. But then the business side and, the interest from teams wasn't there at one point. So he went to China to play basketball over there. And he had like a second wind in his career over there, playing like another 8 years and winning multiple, I guess, their world championships in their country for their basketball league. And I think he still goes over there. He still like works over there in some form. But you're right. There's a ton of money, and it's a big business. It's what I mean. The country's essentially, especially in population, it's bigger than the United States. And they have a ton of money. Like Saudi Arabia is also there making, their offers for all that. The United Arab Emirates, but yeah, I think Zhilei Zhang is ready for. I mean, whether he's ready or not, I mean, based on these two performances against Joe Joyce, it obviously looks like he's definitely ready or at least deserving for a big matchup with one of the bigger heavyweights. Don't you think? Or do you think he hasn't really, because he's beaten Joe Joyce, he hasn't really deserved, I guess, that next level against those guys?
I don't think he deserves it, just the fact that he's got himself into that position. He holds the WBO interim. In my opinion, he hasn't actually lost. I thought he beat Hrgovic, but Hrgovic, I think, went into that fight as the favorite, and the judges, kind of gave that to him. I thought Zhilei Zhang won that fight, so he really should be 27-0. And he would have had another good name on his ledger, in Joe Joyce and also, Hrgovic. So, he's in there. He's obviously mandatory now for Usyk, but if you're him, you'd probably turn around and be like, you'd really want to fight, the two that we've mentioned in China, just because, he's 40 years old, huge payday for him. You've got to try to cash out at some point, right?
Do you think that Frank Warren would make a rematch between Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois? Did they fight once or twice?
Twice. This was the rematch from, I don't know, 5 months ago or something.
No. I'm talking about did Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois fight once or twice?
Oh, sorry, just the once.
Just the once, right? Do you think Frank Warren is maybe considering now, especially after having Joyce lose back-to-back here, maybe he puts him against Daniel Dubois again? And because Dubois, you're like, oh, okay, well, they both suffer some losses. Let's put them against each other again.
I don't know, because he seemed a little bit down on Joe Joyce after the fight. I think he was telling him to retire. I don't know. Maybe he's looking at, the minimum purse that he has to pay Joe Joyce, and he's thinking to himself, well, he's just taken 2 back-to-back pretty convincing losses. I don't really want to put him on a card because, is he going to generate that much money? But it's good for Daniel Dubois, if he's going to go on the rise. What's one thing that all fighters like to do? They'd like to go back and obviously revenge their losses. And so far, that's Dubois' only loss. And it could be a good time for him to jump on it, jump on Joe when, his confidence is down and stuff like that. It's kind of showing that maybe there is, a way to beat him, because at the time when Dubois was fighting him and up until recently, he looked unstoppable. We were calling him the juggernaut because he was just walking through everyone's punches, comically at times, walking through punches. So, yeah, Frank Warren did seem down on him, but, if I was Dubois, maybe it's a good time, to get in there, because the heavyweight division is a little bit stagnant, right? Because, like everyone's kind of waiting for Usyk and, waiting for Tyson Fury, and, unfortunately they're not fighting each other yet. So, you haven't got all the time in the world. If we look back at careers of people like Amir Khan, who waited several years, to get that fight with Floyd Mayweather that never materialized. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you can wait and you get the fight that you want. Like Caleb Plant kind of waited for Canelo, right, and got it. But you just don't know what's around the corner, so you're better off really just to fight and take purses whilst they're there.
No, exactly, yeah. And do you think Frank Warren is considering, and how realistic do you think it could be that he tries to make a Daniel Dubois and Zhilei Zhang in the future now? Maybe next, and sometime next year. I mean, because Dubois is a Frank Warren fighter, right? He still is.
Yeah. I mean, if I was Frank, you'd go for the Fury Zhang first, because you've got both of them.
Right.
You're going to get a slice of the pie. But then after that, yeah, because, Zhang is probably rated, is obviously rated high in the WBO. During that period, you could have Dubois come back. Obviously, you just lost to Usyk. Have a little comeback fight, get a win on the ledger, and then turn around and you could fight. Zhang after Zhang loses to Fury, because I think Tyson Fury probably boxes his ears off, right?
Yeah.
He's a little bit too stagnant and too big to face someone like a Tyson Fury who with the high boxing IQ that he's got. So I'm sure Tyson was absolutely loving it, that the fact that Zhang managed to beat Joe Joyce for a second time.
Yeah, I'm sure he was. I didn't follow any social media postings that he put or anything, but I do wonder if he put anything out there in reaction.
Dollar signs. If I was him, I would be putting dollar signs.
And then the flag of China.
Right.
You never know. You never know. Also on the card, Anthony Yarde gets the second round KO over Jorge Silva, who takes the 9th loss of his career, one away from double-digit losses in his professional career. The 32-year-old Yarde is now 24-3 with 23 knockouts. But Silva, if it's any worth mentioning, was 40 years old. He's been around a while. So, yeah, I mean, it's good that Yarde got the win. Obviously, it's better than obviously taking a loss. But how do you rate this performance, and how do you rate this ultimate victory?
The original fight for Yarde, if I remember rightly, was supposed to be Ricky Summers. Ricky Summers ended up, dropping out last minute with an injury, and Yarde just kind of said to Frank Warren, that he didn't want to move to a later fight later in the year because he'd done a camp, and he's like, I want to get back out after my loss. So they at the last minute, Jorge Silva managed to step in, and it kind of is what it is. I mean, it got to the point where, I'm a member of a few forums and a few groups on Facebook, and some of them are like matchmaking Facebooks. And there was a matchmaker from Frank Warren actually posted.
Oh, wow.
On there. And I think the purse was like $50,000.
Oh, wow.
That's how desperate they were fight week to find someone to step in. So, when you're looking at stuff like that, it was a 2-round knockout win for, Yarde, but, gets him back in the groove, right? And hopefully from what he said, we'll see him in there with, some British British fighters, because that weight division is stacked in the UK. So, selfishly, we've got people like, Dan Aziz, Buatsi, Anthony Yard, and, and several others. So I think it's about time they all faced each other, because it's going to be big paydays. They can have round robins, and, those big British fights always do good numbers for TV.
And also this past weekend from the Caribe Royale Orlando, I think I said, or Caribe, in Florida, Orlando, Florida, on DAZN. Richardson Hitchins remains undefeated at 17-0 with 12-round unanimous decision win over Jose Zepeda, who takes the fourth loss of his career. Hitchins won by scores of 120-108 twice and 119-109. I was telling you before we came on air that I was really surprised about this decision, and how Zepeda was just essentially shut out throughout this fight. Because Zepeda's been in competitive fights. He's been in there with some of the best fighters at 140 pounds. And Richardson Hitchins completely shut down his game. So give me a reaction on the performance of Hitchins. And do you think this was more Hitchins just being supremely more talented than Jose Zepeda, or just Zepeda's, the clock's just catching up? Father Time's is catching up on Zepeda, especially through all the wars that he's been through.
The performance was, it has some negatives and some positives. The performance in terms of just getting a win, outstanding. There's not really much you can say. He probably won every single round, essentially. But for somebody that's going to get wins and generate, enough money and enough interest, Richardson Hitchins isn't going to do that, unfortunately. He has that very kind of, it's like, he just kind of nullifies what the opponent's going to do. And then, when Zepeda was able to actually get into range, he would clinch him and stuff like that. And he would just never, every time Zepeda tried to, come forward, he would just eating jabs and never let him get set. We'd kind of tie him up, hug him, get him in a little headlock and stuff like that. And, Chris Young constantly kind of early on showed that he wasn't going to allow any of that and kept breaking him. So Zepeda was kind of essentially lost because he couldn't get on the inside and get any work done. So, for Hitchins, it's good. He's probably going to win a lot of fights and stuff like that with that style, but I think he's going to bore the crowds. And that's the problem that he's going to have. He's kind of a more boring version of Devin Haney. Someone who has that similar style, but actually is exciting to watch is Shakur, because Shakur has a very, I'll hit you, you don't hit me style, but he goes for knockouts. He seems to be a lot more heavy-handed, whereas Hitchins just kind of has that amateur, gets in, hits you, gets out with style, nullifies everything that you're trying to do, high boxing IQ, but it's just not good for TV. It's just not good to watch. It's because essentially you come in, it's a gladiatorial sport. You want knockouts, and unfortunately, Hitchins doesn't give you that, and maybe he just doesn't have the power, or maybe it's just not, not his style. Maybe eventually he might be able to, change it up and, sit down on his punches a little more. Something like Tyson Fury did, obviously, at this end of his career, but I doubt it.
Do you think that the ideal, I don't want to say finish line, but the ideal pathway here for Eddie Hearn and Matchroom and DAZN is to make a Hitchins and Devin Haney at 140? Since Devin Haney now essentially, we've seen all these reports that he's vacated some titles at 135 or something, and he's just going to, the pro-grade fight is supposedly still being negotiated, but that hasn't materialized or finalized. Do you think that, obviously I'm sure they've thought about it. Eddie Hearn's thought about it. DAZN has thought about it. But when would you think ideally that Eddie Hearn and DAZN would want to make a Hitchins versus Haney at 140 pounds? Next year? Or is that too early? Maybe 2 years down the line?
Would you want to make it?
Well, it's not. That's besides the point. It's more just to say, just to have them have opponents for each other. You're right. In terms of entertainment for the viewer,
it'd be terrible.
Yeah. It would be more of a technical boxing matchup. Yeah, absolutely. But who could DAZN and Eddie Hearn offer to Devin Haney at 140 right now? 140 essentially 140 is kind of spread out across different, you got Teofimo at ESPN. You got, I guess if you want to still count Josh Taylor, even though he's probably going to be 147, Tank Davis, like even Shakur, but they're all kind of spread out. So the DAZN and Matchroom and Eddie Hearn are going to need options for somebody like Devin Haney, especially because he's coming up as, the undisputed champion from the weight below to fight at 140. And you also got Prograis there too as well. What's the pathway here for somebody like Hitchins for DAZN and Matchroom?
Kind of going back to the first thing you kind of mentioned. Regis Prograis and Devin Haney, I believe, is going to get announced this week. I saw some interviews with Frank Smith and Eddie Hearn, and that's going to be in San Francisco, like we spoke about.
Is that? I know, because I know we talked about that a couple weeks ago about San Francisco, but we hadn't heard anything since. It was just reports. Does it seem like it's going to get finalized, or what are we looking at here?
From what Frank Smith and Eddie said in the interviews I watched from the weekend, they said this week, so I would imagine Monday. I'm sure they'll probably let the weekend get out the way, and then Monday they'll put out, like a poster, and then, they'll start like all the media stuff, I would imagine, some point this week. But, I personally wouldn't put, Hitchins in with Devin Haney just because very similar fighters. I don't think the fight would be too good, and they're not super popular characters. So, like, Devin Haney, from what we all hear, he commands a pretty high purse, and are you going to get that back? Richardson Hitchins is a pretty much unknown. He headlined this fight. I don't know. He didn't do great numbers, I don't think, in Florida. It was a very small ballroom event by the look of it. So I think they need to be matched separately. Montana Love could be somebody. If he's still
that's right. Yeah.
If he's still with Matchroom, because they had that fight with Steve Spark where he threw him out the ring and then he got disqualified, if you remember.
That's crazy.
So you could stick Hitchins in with someone like Montana Love, maybe Steve Spark, if they've still got options with him. Because I still think he needs to be, built a little bit before sticking him in with somebody like a Teofimo Lopez, a Regis Prograis, a Devin Haney. Try to get him, more popular, hopefully stick him in there with the right opponents, and maybe someone that they could actually, take out, whether it been, a TKO just from a flurry of punches, because he doesn't seem to be like a one-punch knockout artist. So just, you got to draw more attention to him. I still think there's some building to do before we stick him in there with someone like a Devin Haney, because he's got the skills, he's got the boxing IQ. He's just not built yet.
And then for Zepeda, and during this fight between Hitchins and Zepeda, there was a clash of heads in the 10th round when Hitchins missed with the forearm block. So Zepeda got pretty much the negative side of that contact between the heads as he started bleeding pretty bad, especially in the final few rounds. For Zepeda, he's been with Top Rank, ESPN. He fought. Was it Prograis or in here in LA at the StubHub with that random promoter?
With Marv Nation.
Right, Marv Nation. Yeah, he's kind of been all over the place now. What are we looking at Zepeda here? Is Golden Boy going to sneak in and offer Zepeda maybe some fights, maybe for Ryan Garcia or maybe even Jojo Diaz at 140 or William Zepeda? Zepeda versus Zepeda? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great shout, to be honest with you. It looks like, Zepeda's 34 now. He's had, a whole host of fights. He's, I think he's like, 30, maybe even 40 fights now. So, he could end up being kind of used like Jose Pedraza. He's had 41 fights now.
Right.
So, I could see him, kind of just sticking around for a few more paydays and essentially becoming like a gatekeeper, fighting some of these guys who were up and coming. I suppose it just really depends, something that we can't see, how much heart does he have left? Has he made enough money where he doesn't need it anymore? Or, does he still need a few more, paydays just to make sure that he's, him and his family are going to be right? So we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And also on the card, Jessica McCaskill fights to a split decision draw against Sandy Ryan. This was for the IBO, WBA, WBC, and WBO welterweight titles. The scores were 95-95 twice, 94-96, and 97-93. Obviously, the last two scores were split between the competitors. I saw some clips of this fight. It wasn't really, in your face action. What'd you think?
In terms of the judges' scorecards, absolutely awful, absolutely atrocious, ridiculous. How on earth they had McCaskill winning 97-93 should be looked at, because I thought McCaskill was absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. She's literally just, like, if she was a man, she'd be like a low level, super low level, like club fighter. Just her technique is awful. She has low hands constantly. She didn't look like she came in shape. Just absolutely awful. I thought Sandy Ryan pretty much won 8 rounds. It was convincing. You could see. I'm trying to think who was on the broadcast now. Mora, Chris Mannix, Corey Erdman, and there was a fighter who was on there. Oh, Sonny Edwards. Sonny Edwards was on there, and all of them said, last round, pretty much they were like, yeah, Sandy Ryan's won, blah, 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 kind of talking about what's going to come next. And then the scorecards came out and everybody said it. Even McCaskill looked shocked in the in-ring interview afterwards.
Right.
That when they went up to her, she didn't even say, oh, yeah, I won. Yeah, I won. She's like, yeah, no, I thought it was close. And, maybe like one round or something like that. So, yeah, it just goes to show, they need to.
Would you really think as a fighter, if you were a fighter, do you think it's better for them to admit that they lost, even if it was a draw, or what do you think it's better for their reputation and their stock as a fighter going forward? What do you think? Should they admit that they lost, even if it was a draw or whatever?
If it's close by like a round, you can convince yourself and maybe convince other people, but that wasn't even close. Like, I know the scorecard showed it, but it was absolutely not close at all. And I think if you get beat like that, you're better off just saying it, because you're not going to fool the people that are watching, because at the end of the day, it's a draw. That's not going to change. They're not going to turn around because you've said, like, yeah, I lost. I didn't deserve to win the belts today. I think you'd probably gather more fans by that, because how unusual that would be. I think people would be like, you know what, I like that. I like the fact that he was honest about that, or she was honest about that, because we're talking about Jessica McCaskill. It's a nice change of pace, isn't it, to have someone be honest like that and say. But yeah, that needs to be looked at. The scorecards for that fight were pretty bad, and then obviously the next one with the Conor Benn card, one of those scorecards was pretty bad as well. So yeah, boxing fire.
Like you just touched on, Conor Benn makes his return to the ring, which was pretty major news over this past weekend. Probably, at least in the boxing world, probably the most talked about news over the last couple of days. Conor Benn, as I mentioned, makes his return ever since testing positive for banned substances in his fight against Chris Eubank. There wasn't a fight, and hit the scheduled fight against Chris Eubank Jr. This was the first time that Conor Benn has been licensed in any territory, I think, in the world since that situation. There was definitely some vocal and visible criticism in regards to if Conor Benn should be fighting or not. I guess there's some confusion or some discrepancies in terms of if the British Board of Boxing Control has essentially cleared Conor Benn or not in their investigation regarding the testing. I saw some interviews where Eddie Hearn said that he was. I guess it just depends on the explanation. So before we actually, I get your reaction on his performance. What was your reaction when you saw that Conor Benn was coming on this card? Do you think it was planned already and they just kind of slid it in there to try to avoid the long weeks PR for this leading up to this event? Or do you think it was really, hey, we need somebody to step in, whatever, let's just throw Conor Benn in there?
Yeah, I believe it was probably planned. I assume they were just waiting for the blessing of the Florida Commission. from what Eddie and people were saying, it looks like they had to reach out to the British Board of Boxing just to make sure that, he wasn't still suspended. And then obviously, it found out that he wasn't. And obviously they just slid him in, obviously, depending on whether they could find an opponent in time. And like you said, I'm sure, even if they had the approval weeks in advance, they didn't want 2 weeks of interviews about Conor Benn, like overshadowing the whole event. I think it was announced like Monday or Tuesday. So then they had to put up with, 4 or 5 days worth of Conor Benn questions, which, I kind of get. But then looking at it, should he have been there? Really with, it looks like the British Board of Boxing are going to appeal, that fact. But it's just funny because, I was kind of like looking into it, for the podcast and, just being intrigued, obviously, in boxing that, the way they got around it was, they weren't denying that he tested positive. They were just saying to the British Board of Boxing, you can't ban him because it was a VADA test. And your rules state that you don't recognize VADA tests. So that was pretty much their legal battle that they went around. So the British Board of Boxing had to essentially be like, okay, no, that's fair enough. That's not your jurisdiction. It wasn't a UKAD test, which is what you use, which is funny because then you kind of like, well, okay, like what's the point in paying for VADA if they test positive under VADA, and then you're going to claim that you can't ban them? What's the point in having VADA?
That is a fair question to ask. And do you think ever since this situation has been unfolding and, Matchroom and Conor Benn's team essentially challenging the legality of any potential ban, do you think that would cause the British Boxing Board of Control to amend their rules and regulations to include VADA? Like, hey, they're kind of right. We don't have this listed. We have UKAD listed. We should include WADA, VADA, all the major players who would potentially be included in any fights. Do you think this is going to cause a ripple effect to make that change?
I mean, common sense would say yes, right? So I would hope so, but boxing is such a weird sport with stuff that happens. You would think that they would add it immediately, Maybe the rules had just been written that long ago and nobody had really looked at it and amended it, that it had kind of just gone like overlooked, where they didn't think like, oh crap, we've never actually added that in there. So far, no one's ever challenged it, so they've never had to change it. But, hopefully, after this event and this, kind of atrocity of, what it's, it's dragged on for what, 18 months? And then essentially...
a long time.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in a weird way, that he kind of had an 18-month ban, right? Because of the fact that, he hasn't been able to fight and, he's only just got back in. So, if anything does come around, it's going to be the same as the Tyson Fury one where they'll just say, okay, like 18 months, but it's backdated to, when you tested positive, and then that's all that's going to happen now, because he's already been out. He's already essentially served some type of ban, I guess. But then it's just funny that, Eddie does that, and then was it like last week or 2 weeks ago, he then says that every single Matchroom card is now going to have VADA, and it's going to be like every single person who fights in it is going to be under VADA. And I think he said it's going to cost him around $500,000, I think, per event.
Oof, that's a lot.
Something like that. But
VADA must be really happy about that financially.
But it's like, on one hand, that's really good. That's what we've all wanted in the sport for the longest time. But then you've just circumvented their rules in the UK by saying, hey, you don't recognize VADA, you can't ban them. So it's like, well, what's the point in you paying if someone tests positive and you're just going to get a legal team and go around it? And we all know why. Conor Benn generates a lot of money. The amount of money that they lost in, I think it was $1 million or something, in organizing the Conor Benn Eubank Jr. fight the first time and then it falling through.
Right.
So, yeah, it's boxing for you. We keep saying it, but like it's just it's the Wild West.
And what do you think are the any potential, I guess, after effects of Conor Benn? Obviously Florida gave the green light on them. So, whether Florida deserves criticism or not, that's up for debate. I guess. I don't know. Who knows? But he obviously fought in the state of Florida in the United States. Would California, would Nevada, would they clear him? How would they? What do you think?
They have to, as far as I know. if he's not serving a ban, there's like what was it? You can appeal like the right to work or something like that. Essentially, like if he's not suspended for something and he was found not guilty, you can't stop him from working.
Right.
There's some type of law that Eddie briefly mentioned it in some type of interview. I think if because they were talking about, if Conor Benn decides to fight, Chris Eubank Jr. in the UK, and the British Board of Boxing tried to turn down his license, he mentioned something about there's like a law, with right to work, you can't just refuse that on like no grounds, because essentially he won the case, so they can't stop him from working. So I think that would be similar, if they decided to hold that huge fight in California for some random reason, they can't. He essentially won the case, right? You can't stop him from working. You can't stop him from earning a living just on, something that you're like, oh, well, I think you're guilty. But so what? I was found not guilty. It doesn't matter what you think.
Right.
It needs to be a valid
true.
reason to stop him from getting, a visa or a license as such. So, as much as we probably all think that he got caught and, he's managed to get around it, it's the system. And if anything comes out of this, hopefully we get a better testing system.
Do you think it's more that the British Boxing Board of Control, as I don't really think I find it hard to believe that they were unaware or oblivious to not having VADA within their internal rules and regulations and bylaws. I find that hard to believe. I feel like you said, they might have known, but they just said they thought or assumed, oh, well, no, nothing's happened yet. Why change anything if it's not broken? We haven't had to cross that bridge yet. So why are we going to create something if we haven't had the situation presented to us? Because that is strange. Did they look at it more like, well, we have the utmost confidence in UKAD because, it's UK based and all that. That's, the testing body for obviously the United Kingdom. Did they look at it maybe like, well, if VADA's included as well, and UKAD is obviously going to be there when it's a fight over here, they should find the same thing, if they're using similar techniques. Do you think that maybe they looked at it like that, or you think it was just laziness and they thought, oh, well, why adapt? Why make any adaptive changes if we haven't had to yet?
Yeah, I think it's just like, when people make case law, it'd never been challenged. They probably just said, oh, well, it's written like that, but we mean, everyone. We mean VADA, we mean WADA, we mean UKAD. But Eddie Hearn's got deep pockets and, good legal team. They said, yeah, but we're taking that verbatim. You're right. Saying that, but that's not what it says. I'm sure it's something along those lines, where people challenge stuff and make case law, for the rest of time. I'm sure that's what it is. It's like, going forward, we're going to have, Conor Benn case law because, he challenged it and he won. And like I said, if anything comes out of this, it's hopefully we just have, a better system, going forward where, people are going to get tested more. They're going to, we're going to get more positive tests and stuff like that to begin with. And eventually, we'll hopefully have a cleanish sport. But, these mad scientists are always ahead of the game, they're always ahead of the curve. And, the guys who have deep pockets and stuff like that, they can kind of negate the rules, right? When someone just randomly goes for a training camp in the Philippines or somewhere mad, knowing that VADA probably don't have the money to fly out there and, come and test them.
So do you think that Conor Benn now doing this and being licensed in Florida and fighting in Florida this past weekend, because it's like so vague and, that he did win the case and then, the interpretation of the rules and regulations over there in the UK in regards to the situation, do you think that the British Boxing Board of Control is going to do everything in their power to try to keep him from fighting on UK soil again? Or do you think that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom and Conor Benn's team are going to challenge them to try to make a fight? Because, you would think that DAZN and Eddie Hearn are still highly interested in, especially because Eubank actually he won. But do you think they're still interested in making that Eubank matchup?
100%. It's the biggest fight for both of them. It's a huge fight for Conor Benn. in terms of purse. Same for Chris Eubank Jr., and I'm sure that brings the most money to Matchroom as well. Outside of like a Fury AJ fight, I couldn't really think of a British matchup that would be as big off the top of my head. It's a big fight. Yeah, it's just the name, right? Because you've got that generational thing from the fathers to them. And then there, characters themselves, you've got Chris Eubank Jr. that has that kind of like arrogance, confidence. And then you have, Conor Benn, who's kind of always walks around with like 100%, like he's constantly pissed off and he's about to snap at any minute. So I'm sure the press conferences and stuff like that leading up to it will be insane. And I think, didn't the first fight, like, it was set for Manchester and it's sold out like on the first day, like in a couple of hours or something like that.
Quick. Yeah.
Yeah. So, due to all of that, like, why would you not try to make it? And, the British body boxing, I'm sure they're not happy with it, at least, but I don't think they can stop him, essentially. I think, they don't have a lot of money, so they can't just keep appealing and taking it to court, because it must be costing them a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. And they're obviously the public agency over there, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have, it'd be like California. They don't have deep pockets, and they have the most fights in the whole of the US, and they're not swimming in money.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be very interesting to see. And then, focusing on the actual fight that he had, he did go the full 10 rounds with his opponent, Rodolfo Orozco. Conor Benn did win by scores of 99-91 twice and 96-94. Is that something we should look into? Should we analyze that, or should we just kind of overlook it and do you look at it more as Conor Benn trying to get in there just to get some rounds? What do you think?
I mean, it's hard to tell, because I'm sure that you don't know, neither of us know that much about Orozco, but he definitely has a flipping chin on him. I'll give him that, because he caught him flush a few times, and he kind of just walked forward, and he made it into a really good fight. It was a really good 10 rounds to watch, just because Orozco just never really kind of backed down and just kept coming and got a really good performance. It's one of those ones where, you come in as the underdog and you give a good performance. And I think Matchroom openly said that, they were impressed by him, and he'd definitely be coming back on one of their Matchroom Mexico shows, which is good for him. If anything, going 10 rounds may give some of the people, confidence that they can get in there with Conor Benn. They're like, oh, you know what? You only fucking knocked these guys out like Algieri and Van Herden because he was on steroids, I'll fight him now. Now that he's not on there, he's not the same animal. But, we'll see. I would imagine by the end of the year, start of maybe 2024, January time, I'm sure we'll see him in there with Chris Eubank Jr. It's just, is it with Matchroom? Is it going to be with, Boxer? Is it going to be in England, or is it going to be in Saudi?
Oh, you know how pissed off the UK fan base would be if that fight, a Ben Eubank fight, wasn't in on British soil, UK soil.
That's exactly the card that Eddie's going to play going forward. I'm sure that's all we'll hear on like IFL TV, Boxing Social. He's just going to use that against Robert Smith and the British border boxing. We want to put it in England, but the border boxing, and it's just going to use that against them and have everybody against them.
Yeah, a PR man, a PR spin.
He's the PR master. Uncle Eddie's a PR master.
That is ridiculous. Also on the card, Austin Ammo Williams returns and remains undefeated at 15-0 with a 10-round unanimous decision win over Steve Rolls, who takes the third loss of his career. This was for the IBF North American middleweight title. Obviously, Rolls has been in there with like Triple G, and I think Berlanga. I think was in there with Berlanga at one point. I feel like Austin Williams hasn't. I feel like we haven't seen him in a while. Am I wrong, or maybe I'm just overlooking it? What's going on here?
He's been on a couple of Eddie shows, but not really in there with anybody of note. Because if you remember, he had that, the mental health, where he stepped away from the ring for a period of time, and then he came back. And let's have a look. He was out at the start of this year, April, against River Wilson Bent, where he won by 8th round TKO, and then he was out 3 times. Was it 4 times last year against, just lower level kind of opponents, nobody of real note. But this was probably a good step up for him. I wasn't overly impressed though. I saw the same on Twitter. People were like, you know what, like they're kind of pushing Amo Williams on us, and now he's pretty highly ranked. But I don't see it. I don't see him really beating anybody at middleweight. I think he's still got a long way to go.
Right.
But he's super confident. In the interviews afterwards, he said he's ready to step in there now. So,
do you think he's ready?
No, I mean I don't think so. Especially against some of the is it Akman? What's he called? I can't pronounce his name. Zanibek. I'll just say his first name.
Zanibek. Yeah,
Zanibek.
Yeah.
I think he would have him twisting and turning, and I think he would deal with Amo Williams pretty easily. And I know that he's going in there coming up soon against Vincenzo. Is it Gulleretti? Is that how you pronounce it? From Germany. I know that Beck and those two are fighting each other, so that should be a decent fight. I don't know. Would you stick him in there with someone like a Liam Smith?
Maybe. I mean, but Smith just even though he lost in his last bout against Eubank, I feel like Smith still, he's still dangerous. So, but yeah, why not? Why not?
If I was Matchroom, I would have him in there with Michael Zarafa. He's still surprisingly highly ranked from Australia, not much punching power. And Michael Zarafa, he's been in there with some names. He's been in there with Kell Brook, Jeff Horn. So you kind of get that, you take that star power, right? Like, oh, okay, like I recognize that guy. I remember him fighting Kell Brooks. So
right.
I think that would be someone of note that Amo could probably beat, and he's still climbing the rankings.
I can see that. Yeah, I can agree with that suggestion of an opponent. Moving on to fight previews. This upcoming Saturday, the 30th of September, from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, on Showtime pay-per-view, the biggest draw in boxing, I think it's still safe to say, returns to the ring. Saul Canelo Alvarez, 59-2-2, goes up against Jermell Charlo, 35-1-1. This is for the undisputed super middleweight titles of the world. At least until that first bell rings, they are able to use the titles of undisputed champion versus undisputed champion for both of them. Because when that bell does ring, Jermell Charlo is undisputed right now at 154. Canelo has been undisputed at 168 for a while now. But Charlo will be losing, I believe, is it the WBO or is it the IBF? It's WBO, right?
Yeah.
The WBO has already announced that when that bell rings for this fight this Saturday in Las Vegas on Showtime pay-per-view, that Charlo will be stripped of that title, of the WBO 154 title. So I guess up until that bell rings, as I mentioned, it is undisputed. But when that bell rings again, or when that fight finishes one way or another, the undisputed title will not be there any longer. And when this was announced, everybody was, shocked. We thought it was going to be Jermell Charlo, which is the brother who fights at 160 pounds. We thought he would move up to 168 to fight Canelo. Reportedly, I guess that was the original plan from what we've seen in reports, but one reason or another happened, and Jermell Charlo could not be the opponent. So his lighter brother in weight stepped in, I guess, reportedly, and is moving up, in a sense, 14 pounds to fight the king of boxing, I guess, in Canelo Alvarez. What do you think? What do you think about this matchup? Are we going to see a more competitive fight than we think? Is the weight that Jermell Charlo going up, is it just going to be too much against somebody with the technique and the experience and the talent of Canelo Alvarez? What do you think?
When you saw them in the face-off, wasn't much difference, really, because Canelo, I think we forget, has always just been kind of doing the impossible, and just always being the smaller guy, and he was always just fighting the bigger guys, moving up to 160, 168, or going up to 175. Because he kept winning. I think we just kind of forgot, that he was constantly going in there like against all odds. He was always the shorter, he's always stocky and strong, but he was always the shorter guy, naturally smaller in terms of weight as well. But when you saw these guys facing off, I didn't think Charlo was, he didn't look smaller. He wasn't like as stocky, wasn't as thick as Canelo. But I'm assuming it just means it's going to be easier for him to do the weight cut. He's not going to have to take off all that weight before he gets in there with him. I think it's a good matchup. I think, the 154, Jermell Charlo is a good fighter. He's been in there with some, really good opponents, but this is going to be a bit of a test for him, not just moving up 14 pounds. You're moving up 14 pounds and fighting probably one of the greatest fighters of the last, 5 years, something like that,
Decade, essentially.
Yeah, probably the last 5 to 10 years. He's, I think this will kind of show us, is Canelo kind of on the slide right now? Because the last few times he's got in there, when he's facing people like Bivol, Ryder, people were saying, he's on the slide, he's not as good, thinking he should have taken John Ryder out. But then also, losing to Bivol essentially pretty easily, which kind of
Bivol was always
people.
Bivol was always. I mean, regardless, you're right, but Bivol was always a threat. It's just he wasn't known to people, but he was always a threat.
Yeah. So I think this will show us. I think Canelo will win. I think he'll eventually get to him and stop him. I think we'll see a similar performance to when Canelo fought Callum Smith. I think he'll just keep punching him, and it'll be all over the body though. I don't think he'll just go headhunting. I think he'll go in there. He'll try to negate him by like the old Duran style, just hitting him, on the side, hitting him on the shoulder, hitting him on the bicep and stuff like that. Literally just kind of like beating him down. And I think eventually, he'll end up stopping him in one of the late rounds.
You think so?
I think so, yeah. I think Canelo's just, I just think he's that good still. I don't think he's on the slide. I thought when he fought John Ryder's just a big, tough guy. And then, like you said, I think people that know boxing know that the losing to Bivol wasn't that bad. Bivol can box. Bivol was the bigger, more naturally sized guy. And he just came in with somebody that's got a high boxing IQ. People forget that Bivol was a high decorated amateur.
Yeah.
It's just that he was in that
talented
who wants him category as a pro, because he was super, super good, but didn't bring a lot of money and a lot of belts to the table. So nobody ever wanted to face him. So he wasn't seen by your casual fans.
How likely do you think that Jermell Charlo tries to get into a brawl with Canelo? Because we've seen Charlo get into brawls in his past fights, and I think it's safe to say that if you had to pick which one of the Charlo brothers was the more talented, has had the more competitive and experienced fights, it's probably Jermell Charlo, who's obviously in this fight, and he's proven it with the undisputed titles at 154 and all that. But I mean, I don't know why, but I'm thinking, and I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking this question: if Charlo's going to try to get into a brawl with Canelo, but I kind of have this feeling that it might end up kind of being like a Caleb Plant, Canelo Alvarez fight, where Caleb Plant was fighting pretty decently in terms of technique and everything, up until he got caught and he got knocked out and the fight was over. Am I misjudging? Am I misjudging this in terms of thinking about it like that, or what do you think?
See, I think you've got to, with Canelo being the smaller, probably stockier, and maybe even heavier guy, naturally stronger, I think you've got to box him like Bivol did. Bivol kind of showed people like a path to do it, box him from the outside. Charlo's not
a Bivol though. He doesn't have that technique. He's good. I'm not saying he's not good. He's a great fighter, but Charlo and Bivol are not the same fighter. They're not the. I mean, obviously he's gonna. I'm sure they're looking at tape of Bivol, and obviously that makes sense. But like you touched on earlier, Canelo's most likely gonna go to what he's been doing the last couple fights, where he hits him on the bicep, hits him on the leg or whatever, to try to slow them down all over their body. Doing that to Bivol, who was the bigger fighter, who was fighting at 175 pounds, Bivol was able to absorb that. But even in the post-fight and in interviews, Bivol said, like, oh no, he's like, my arm, like it hurts. But Bivol was able to take it because of his size and his strength. Do you think Charlo is going to be able to take those?
No, that's why I don't think that that would be a good decision for him to try to stand and bang with him. I think that Canelo's just, because he's been fighting at 168 and 175, I think he's just naturally now the bigger, stronger, sturdier type of guy. So I don't think, unless he gets old overnight and his chin just disappears from the shots that we've seen him take over time, especially, this is many years ago now, but some of the flush shots he took from Triple G and he just stood there.
Right.
Just Charlo hit like that? I don't think so, not from what we've seen so far. And like you said, I don't think we've ever really seen, and I'm not saying he can't do it, we've never really seen Jermell have to box from the outside. So far, if you look at the fights when he fought Castaño, he managed to get Castaño to brawl, like you said. I think he, the fact that he managed to beat him the second time around is, he managed just to catch Castaño and bring him into his type of fight. Bring him more into like that type of brawl. Same for when he fought someone like Rosario, Tony Harrison.
Tony Harrison too. I mean, Tony Harrison in that first fight, really, he was just boxing him.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking about that at the time. Harrison kind of like stood him on his head, I thought, the first time around. And then the second time around, Tony just did that stupid thing where he kind of like takes rounds off. And then he was up against the ropes, if I remember rightly, and Charlo just caught him. And then that was all that she wrote. And that's not something you're going to get from Canelo. He's a super professional. He doesn't really take rounds off or anything like that. He's always dialed in. And I don't think that we've seen a style from Charlo so far that would beat Canelo. But I'm not saying he doesn't have it. Maybe he's just been in fights where he's never needed to show it.
Exactly. And, and if anybody's going to get that out of you, it's going to be somebody on the biggest stage like Canelo Alvarez. That's the thing. And Jermell Charlo, obviously we can see that the Charlo brothers, they're very emotional guys in terms of, behavior and interviews and just kind of, I guess reacting to things, it kind of really easily affects them, in terms of skin thickness. So I don't know, maybe if Canelo catches Charlo with a good shot, Charlo maybe kind of, he kind of throws his plan out the window, or he starts getting a little bit more like upset and starts to make some mistakes. I mean, that, obviously that happens in fighting, especially in boxing. I think Jermell, in comparison to his brother being in this fight, I think Jermell is the more talented fighter, and I think he will put up a better competitive fight than his brother at 160 pounds in Jermall. But yeah, I just think that, you're on the big stage. Eventually, if you get the opportunity, you get to the big stage like these guys against right now a Canelo Alvarez, or back in the day with a Floyd, an Oscar De La Hoya, a Chavez, a Pacquiao, a Mike Tyson, and all of that. Can you? What is Mayweather? What did he always used to say? He's like, oh yeah, you can be the best fighter in the gym, but I'm the best fighter under the lights. That's real. That is real. Like, and I know Charlo's been in some big fights and, in front of big crowds on Showtime and all that. But when you level up to the highest level you can get in fighting like this, fighting the cash cow, the king of the sport, it is a different environment. You can feel the environment. It's a different feeling. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think Canelo stops him. I think he stops him within 10. And it's also because, you did mention that Canelo doesn't take rounds off. You're right in a sense. I could agree with that. I can see why you said that, but it's also like Canelo does take a couple rounds to dissect you. It's not that he's really taking the round off. He's still throwing, but he's trying to pretty much measure where you're coming from in those first couple rounds, and sometimes he just takes a little bit too long, kind of like a Lomachenko. So, is he going to take 2 or 3 rounds again to try to dissect Charlo to see where he's coming from, and then turn it on in rounds 4, 5 through 12? Possibly. I mean, because that's usually his MO, what Canelo's been doing for quite a few years against opponents. But I think within 10, I think Canelo stops him. But I think Charlo's going to go for it. I think Charlo, because, like I said, him and his brother, they're both emotional guys wearing like their heart on their sleeve. I think he's going to really go for it, especially if he's backed into a corner. He's a fighter. Like he'll brawl and he'll give it all he got. So I do give that to him. So, but it's an intriguing matchup. It really is. But I think, like you mentioned, the size difference, even though when they were standing face to face and all that, Canelo's been fighting the bigger guys for the last, 4 or 5 years now, or whatever it's been, 3 years, 4 years, or whatever it's been, between 168 and 175, and Charlo's been fighting guys at 154 and moving up 14 pounds. That's pretty big. So, I agree with you. I think we both are on the same page here. It just depends on. I'm not sure what you said in terms of rounds, but I said within 10.
Yeah, I was going to say I think towards the back end, like round 10, round 9, 10, or 11. I think he just wears him down, and we've never really seen Charlo so far have to go through adversity, and I just wonder like how he's going to, like you said, they do wear the heart on the sleeve, and I just wonder how. Is he going to rise to the occasion, or is he going to wilt? Because they're very, very emotional guys, both of them. So that's going to be interesting. But before we move on, there's 2 things I wanted to throw to you: is with the 3 fights for PBC, are we going to see Charlo, the other Charlo, and then Benavidez, and then also Canelo's didn't fight Mexican Independence Day weekend, and Dana White came out saying that show was successful, and now, regardless of whether whoever's fighting, UFC are going to go that weekend every year.
Oh yeah, I heard him say that, and I mean, let's see if he does. Like, I mean, because I feel like Canelo and whoever he's with at the time, is gonna. I don't think Canelo's gonna next year. He's gonna try to get that date. I think he's gonna be like, no, I'm gonna get that date. Like, he's gonna give it a shot, but we'll see. But in terms of what you just said about Charlo. Kind of, how we talked about how he wears the hearts on his sleeve, him and his brother. I do expect him, unless he just gets really knocked out with that one shot and just doesn't get up, like if he's hurt or if he's like really just losing the fight or something, he's the type of fighter that will really just go for it. He'll just brawl out and try to go for it. Like, okay, I'm losing the fight or I'm hurt. I'm just going to throw everything I got at him. What do I got to lose? I'm already losing the fight, or I can feel that I'm hurt. I feel like Charlo is that type of fighter. He'll go for it. So I think that's what also makes this fight very intriguing. And it's interesting when you see. It's kind of, we talked about Conor Benn, Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn was essentially moving up in weight. I know it was like a catch weight, I believe. But it is interesting, even though it is a smaller fighter essentially going up in weight to fight a bigger fighter in a way, if you want to categorize it like that. But, undisputed champion at that weight versus another undisputed champion, marketing-wise, PR-wise, for Showtime, I'm sure they're loving it. But, yeah, I think we agree. Canelo within 10, I think, is our prediction, a pretty safe prediction. And then Dana White, he's said things in the past before, and he's changed his mind. So, let's see if he really goes for Mexican Independence Day weekend next year. Let's see if he really does it. Because, he says one thing, and then if next year, if he doesn't have that date or he doesn't do that weekend, he could be like, there was just some logistical things that didn't work out for the day, so we couldn't do it. But it's not that we were going to do it. We were going to do it. There was just stuff behind the scenes, scheduling wise, that we couldn't coordinate fast enough to secure the date. I feel like that's what's going to be, but Canelo, I think, is definitely going to try to get that weekend back. Because when's the last time boxing has lost Mexican Independence Day weekend for a big event? This is the first time in how many years? Think about it.
The need to do Canelo Benavidez.
Yeah, I can see that maybe next year. But we'll see. I mean, if Canelo beats Jermell, maybe he might want to fight Jermell, and then they could sell it from a marketing standpoint, like, let his brother try to avenge it. I mean, you never know. In the co-main event of this Showtime pay-per-view card, Yordenis Ugas, former welterweight world champion, 27-5, goes up against Mario Barrios, 27-2. This is for the WBC interim welterweight championship of the world. What do you think about this fight?
Interesting fight. They seem to love Barrios because he gets title shot after title shot. You know, he came in, fought Gervonta Davis, lost to him, fought Keith Thurman, lost to him. Came back and fought Giovanni Santiago, won that by 8th round TKO. Boom, straight back in for a WBC interim world title shot. So, yeah, PBC like him. I'm guessing he must be popular or he puts bums on seats or something like that. But I think Ugas, if Ugas still has it, I think he should be able to, you know, box Barrios pretty easily and, you know, get the victory. Barrios really is more of a come forward type of slugger. And he really used to, when he was at 140, he was kind of more dangerous because he was naturally the bigger guy and could kind of bully people. But ever since kind of moving up to like 147, I don't see him being as good. But should be an interesting fight. You know, how old is Ugas now?
Probably 35, 36?
Yeah, I was going to say it's not on his box rec. So he must. I would say he's around 35, 36. You know, last time out, lost to Spence in April.
Well, his eye was pretty messed up too.
Yeah, I mean that was over a year ago. That was April 2022. So we'll just see. You know, has he got old overnight? You know, he's only had one fight in 2021 against Manny Pacquiao, one fight in 2022. So this would be his third fight.
Well, I mean, that's par for the course for a lot of PBC fighters the last several years, isn't it? Are we really surprised? You know?
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you. I think Ugas takes this. I think he just the Cuban boxing technique, I think, comes out. Even though he is older, I just think Barrios isn't. He's getting rewarded a lot, for PBC, but I don't think he's the. I just think Ugas is still the more superb, talented fighter. So yeah, either way, it's an intriguing matchup. Both are kind of at a crossroads in their careers. So, let's see how it goes this weekend. Another fight on the card, which is actually a really good card. I'm really looking forward to this one. Jesus Ramos, 20-0, goes up against Erickson Lubin, 25-2. What do you think about this matchup?
This whole card is pretty good. We actually are previewing quite a lot of the fights because this whole card is pretty stacked. You're actually getting your money's worth for this one. Normally when you get a pay-per-view, like 90% of the money is kind of going to the main event and the rest of it is kind of like hit and miss. But this card is pretty good. I don't know whether it's harsh to say you've got a prospect in Ramos fighting potentially a gatekeeper now in Lubin. That might be a little bit harsh, but
you think so? Because Lubin's what, late 20s, I think.
Yeah, but it's every time he fought Charlo, got stopped by Charlo.
I think he was too young in his career and his age when he fought Charlo, because he fought Charlo here in LA at the Galen Center at USC. And I get it, Lubin was still rising, but I think he fought Charlo too young at that point. But that's just me.
Yeah, but he was 21. He was 21 at the time, 6 years ago.
Yeah, so
he just got caught early on, didn't he?
I still think this is an interesting matchup. I mean, Lubin, he lost to the Towery Inferno, didn't he?
Yeah, when his face was all bashed in.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that was? Speaking of Sebastian Fundora, I wonder when he's going to come back. But I think this might be the most competitive matchup of the card of the whole night. I honestly have a feeling it might be.
Yeah, looking at the card, yeah. I mean, it's a pick'em because you got Ramos, who's really kind of like stepping up for the first time against Lubin, who's still only 27, but he's got a lot of experience, fighting Charlo, Ishii Smith, Gallimore, Terrell Geisha, Jason Rosario, Sebastian Fundora, Luis Arias.
Yeah,
I mean, he's been in there with a whole host of people. I might just change my pick there. I was going to go Ramos, but after just naming all those people, you can't buy that experience. So it's
and he's still young. He's he's what, 27? Like you said, he's in his late 20s. So
I'm going to change it. Actually, I just convinced myself.
Oh, you know what? I think is this a first? Is this a first in history in the 5-year life cycle of the last round podcast that you're changing your pick in the middle? You picked one and then you're changing it? I don't know if you've ever done this. Have you? I don't know. I really don't.
I don't think so. Normally I'll just get set, but then looking at that, I think I'm going to go Lubin for Lubin points now.
I was going to go Lubin. I
think Lubin points because if you look at Ramos's record, obviously the one that stands out is Brian Mendoza. And Brian Mendoza just knocked out, the Towering Inferno, Sebastian Fundora. And apart from that, most of the people that, Ramos has fought have kind of been more of your gimme type people. He got in there and obviously knocked out Joseph Spencer. I was never high on Spencer, who the PBC were pushing.
Right.
So, yeah, the only one that really stands out to me is Mendoza. So I think going off that, I'm going to go with someone like Lubin because he's been in there, seen it, done it. And, if he's still got that mentality where he thinks he can win and he still wants to, come again, I think he should be able to take it because I think we've said a few times, if you rewind, Lubin was a hot prospect. Right.
Yeah. But that's why I wanted to, make sure you think about your pick because I was thinking Lubin from the beginning. I think I like Ramos. It's not that I'm counting Ramos out. I just think that Lubin, based on his resume with opponents, I'm edging it to him. But it is a competitive fight matchup, and like I said, I'm repeating again that it might be the most competitive fight of the night. So we will see. Also on the card, a heavyweight matchup: Frank Sanchez, 22-0, who fights with the Canelo camp. He had left them and then he went back. It was pretty quick. It was a very short-lived departure from the Eddie Reynoso camp. Goes up against Scott Alexander, 17-5-2. What do you think about this matchup?
Easy work. Scott Alexander's pretty much just a paid sparring partner for most people. He just does the rounds in LA. I've been to gyms where he's been in there with, Gerald Washington and people like that. And I think that's pretty much how he boxes, to be honest with you. He kind of just comes in and just kind of gets his money, goes through like the routine and, gets out of there. It's kind of interesting that, this was initially supposed to be Frank Sanchez, Chris Arreola. So I'm not too sure what happened on that. I'll have to speak to, the guys on Areola's team, next time we see them and see why that didn't materialize. But it's kind of a really easy gimme fight for Sanchez. I'd be surprised if Scott Alexander managed to spring a victory.
Yeah. I mean, I'm giving it to Frank Sanchez here. As I mentioned earlier, he did leave. He left with Ryan Garcia when Ryan Garcia left the Canelo camp, and then within I think a couple months, it was pretty quick. He ended up returning to Eddie Reynoso and Canelo's camp. I think he realized I think that wasn't the best decision for my career, and he returned. So I think he is still he did return to. I know he did, but is he being trained by Eddie Reynoso?
I believe so. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think him returning is definitely the better trajectory for his career. Also on the card,
Scott Alexander fought Zhilei Zhang last year, lost by first round KO.
Oh, are you surprised about that from what we talked about earlier in the last two fights with Joe Joyce? I don't think so. I'm not really that surprised. Also on the card, the Nail returns. Alexander Gvozdyk, 19-1. It feels like he's been around for a long time. Goes up against Isaac Rodriguez, 28-4. What do you think about this matchup and the Nail coming back?
It should be interesting. It should be interesting to see. He's from his return. He's been pretty busy. They're getting him out there. A lot. He's fought. He had that comeback fight against Obando, and then Bolotniks, and then he's fighting again on another Canelo undercard. Obviously since his link up with Reynoso. So it's going to be interesting. I think Rodriguez seems to either win by knockout or lose by knockout. 28 wins, 22 by knockout, 4 losses, 3 by knockout. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, he's heavy-handed, a 38-year-old coming from Brazil. So it should be an interesting matchup. But I think from what we've seen so far, I think the Nail takes it. If you look at Rodriguez's resume so far, most of them have been, in Brazil and stuff like that. Every time he's come over, he lost to Damon Nicholson by 6-round KO. He's not really a known puncher, so I think the Nail probably starts off slowly, looks at him, works him out, and I think he'll stop him round 8 or 9.
The Nail. Running off the card, Elijah Garcia, 15-0, goes up against Jose Armando Resendes, who's 14-1. And then Terrell Geisha, 23-3-1, goes up against Keandre Leatherwood, 23-8-1. I don't know why I thought that was the same record, but it's not. And then making his debut, at least in the Las Vegas area, and with the backing of Floyd Mayweather, Jermell Motan, I hope I said that right, is making his, as I mentioned, his professional debut against Ezekiel Flores, 4-0. Motan is an 18-time national amateur champion, and as I mentioned, he has the support of Floyd Mayweather. And I believe he lives in the Las Vegas area. He's been around the Mayweather gym, and I think he's known within the circles there in the Las Vegas boxing circle. 18-time national amateur champion. What do you think about that? Do you think, obviously we can play the guessing game like we had before with fighters, but having the pedigree like that, kind of shows that you're pretty serious, right?
Yeah, I mean, just turning pro at 17 and then getting in there with somebody that's 4-0 with 3 knockouts, who trains out of the same gym as Leo Santa Cruz. It shows that he means business, right? He's not getting in there with somebody with 2 wins and 18 losses like most people turning pro. So, it's going to be interesting to see, what he does. Having someone like Floyd Mayweather in the background is obviously going to draw a lot of attention to him. Let's just hope, he's good enough and he's mature enough to handle that, because he's going to get a lot of praise, but he's also going to get a lot of criticism at the same time. Yeah,
exactly. It comes with the territory. And also this upcoming weekend as well, from the Wembley Arena in London on DAZN, Jai Opetaia, undefeated at 22-0, goes up against Jordan Thompson, 15-0. A battle of the undefeateds. This is for the IBF Cruiserweight Championship of the World. What do you think about this IBF Championship matchup?
It should be an interesting matchup, It looked like, Opetaia couldn't really find someone to fight. Jordan Thompson got offered it, stepped in. It's going to be interesting, because this is the sort of fight where you can see just like someone like Thompson kind of just surprisingly gets the fight and then ends up, taking the victory. But Opetaia, beat Breedis Prescott to win it. This obviously shows how good he is. So it's going to be an interesting matchup, I think, just to get in there and see, what Jordan Thompson can do as a last-minute opponent. But, after this, I think we'll hopefully see, Opetaia in there with some, some bigger names. Let's see if we can get some unifications and stuff like that done later down the line. Because it's been a little bit stagnant, that division. And I know that they're trying to get a rematch. I know that I think Kalle Sauerland did an interview and said that, Breedis Prescott's going to be there and he's going to call out the winner and stuff like that. So, is he going to end up, just coming back into it and, taking over again and just kind of slowing down that division? So we'll see. I mean, I'm going to go Opetaia for the win. That performance against, Prescott just shows, how good that he is. And I think it's a big step up for someone like Jordan Thompson.
I agree with that. I think Opetaia has the slight edge here and ends up pulling out the victory. News and notes section of this week's episode of The Last Round. In some unfortunate news for the boxing world, boxing trainer Diego Arrua passed away this past weekend in Tijuana, Mexico, following a heart attack that was suffered during his wife's Sabrina Perez's matchup against Sky Nicholson. According to the WBC president Mauricio Suleiman, when he said on X, formerly known as Twitter, Diego Arrua was 58 years old and he collapsed between rounds 9 and 10 of the bout. So this was actually during the matchup, because I think he was he was the trainer of his wife. So it was during the actual fight, which was on DAZN, a Matchroom boxing card. you know, it's unfortunate. You know, it's unfortunate that it happened, and it's unfortunate how it happened and when it happened. Like, this was just, you know, a combination, a hurricane of bad circumstances, of bad news for the entire situation. You know, you train your wife, your significant other during the fight, and as she's in there, you know, trying to beat somebody else with her fist, you're in the middle of the fight. You know, you suffer a medical emergency and it doesn't work out. You know, it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. I don't know when's the last time. Have you ever heard of something like this happen? I'm sure there has, but like, have we ever talked about this on any past shows of something happening during the fight? Like, during an actual fight? I'm sure that there's been stuff during events, but during the actual fight?
I don't think so. Not to, like, you know, the corner team or anything like that. No, not that jumps out with me. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I mean, we could be wrong, but yeah, it's obviously we send the best wishes to his family, and then Sabrina Perez and her team. Yeah, just unfortunate all around. So, you know, everybody here at the last round definitely sends the best wishes to the family and friends out there of trainer Diego Arrua, who passed away at the age of 58. And then also in some reported news, David Benavidez is reportedly, you know, possibly defending. You know, obviously sometimes we see the reports, they don't materialize. But there seems to be news indicating that he's going to defend his interim WBC super middleweight title against Demetrius Andrade sometime at the end of November on a Showtime pay-per-view card. I mean, this is probably the best matchup that you can make, not just for Benavidez, but obviously for Andrade, but mostly for Benavidez, right? Especially if he's trying to wait out to get the Canelo sweepstakes. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's a stylistic nightmare for Benavidez. You know, he's kind of likes to come forward and kind of just like a juggernaut, I guess. Just kind of comes straight forward, beats you up, just kind of like beats you to a pulp constantly, pressure, and he's normally the bigger, stronger man, you know, because he's pretty big for the super middleweight division. Could probably end up finishing up at like a light heavy or even a cruiserweight eventually later down the line. To fight someone who's a slick boxer like Andrade, that's just stylistically, I think it's going to be a nightmare for him. So all props to him, you know, definitely. You know, if he gets in there with Andrade and actually manages to get the win, then yeah, that's
just imagine if Andrade pulls it off. Like you said, he has that different style, and it's hard to kind of really get in there and find him. Because it's just an interesting style, but
he's got the same problem that we were talking about earlier in Richardson Hitchins.
Right.
He's very good. What is boxing? You know, hit and don't get hit, and that's essentially what they both do.
But Benavidez is definitely a stalker.
Yeah.
You know, he walks you down, and he eventually, you know, he finds you. You know, so I mean, do you think Andre's going to be able to sustain that type of fighting style from somebody like Benavidez for 12 rounds?
That's the problem, isn't it? When you watch Andrade, he kind of, for the first few rounds, he racks up, you know, round after round after round, and then he just kind of goes missing. Because how many times have we seen Andrade in fights where, you know, he's had the opponent like either down or against the ropes, and he looks like he could be able to jump on him. Then his dad's just like, hey, no, don't take the risk. You know, we're winning. Don't jump in there. Don't leave yourself open. And that's the negative thing that I think we've all said about him is, you know, he doesn't have that kind of like bloodlust where like someone like a Joshua, like a Canelo, like when they see someone's injured, they just jump on him and that's it. Like they're just going to get him out of there. Andrade doesn't, just constantly plays it safe. You know, if he's 6, 7, 8 rounds up, you can see him. He's just going to probably dance for the last 4. You know, He's like, well, you know, I just want the W. I don't care about putting on a show and entertaining you guys. So, yeah, I mean, all props to Benavidez. That would be a great fight to watch because just stylistically, who can win the chess match? Can he catch him? And is he good enough to dance around and negate him for 12 rounds?
Right. Yeah. And Andrade finally has, a significant opponent that he's been trying to get for years. So, let's see how it works out. But yeah, I think this is the best opponent on the market right now, the available market for Benavidez. So, I'll give it to him because, he's obviously trying to wait for a Canelo and, Triple G's out going to fight him and, all these other big guys and stuff like that, Charlo and all that. So he's the best one on the market, available on the market. And if this finalizes after these reports we've been seeing, I'll give credit. But it'll be, like you said, it's going to be very interesting to see how it unfolds, just based on both of their styles. And then also, Emmanuel Navarrete has been granted super champion status by the WBO at 130 pounds, which closely followed the same ruling in favor of Teofimo Lopez at 140 pounds. The WBO said because he's very good, he's a star, he fights on ESPN. Were those actually reasons? Those actually reasons they gave?
Yeah, this was taken from ESPN's website.
Wow, that's very interesting. I'm sure people are going to remember those words. A reminder that this is the WBO, not the WBA, who have for years had the words super world and world champion in their own confusion debacle. And they said a couple of years ago that they would take away the regular champion and all that, but it's still kind of there. So I don't know. It's all these alphabet. We keep talking about this. Obviously, we're a boxing podcast. We're going to touch on it, but it's the alphabet soup. But the WBO could potentially go in that direction. But in this case, the super champion status basically amounts to granting a fighter extra leeway in terms of mandatory defense orders and the ability to be considered a mandatory challenger if moving up or down in weight. It's essentially, if they like you, if they like your promoter, if they get along with your promoter, your broadcaster, and then if you make a decent amount of financial return in general, that's pretty much how you get the status, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, you put bums in seats, they'll let you do what you want. If you can move up and down in weight, just fight for championships and stuff like that, where at times it's good, right? We like it because if we've got a really cool champion at 160 and he can go up to 168 and fight somebody, we love it. It's all good. I'm all for that, but I just don't find it strange at times when they just hand them out. I'd like to have seen Teofimo Lopez have at least a couple more fights at 140. He came in, beat Josh Taylor, and then boom, they upgraded him to super champion? Is that what they said?
Yeah. I mean, are we really surprised? I mean, WBO top rank. We've seen it time and time again. So it is what it is. It's boxing at its finest, I guess, if you want to describe it like that. But once again, guys, we appreciate you guys listening to this week's episode of the Last Round podcast. And before we sign off for the week, Mike, go ahead and let them know where they can find us and follow us.
We are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. Be sure to join us next week. We'll be previewing Lee Wood against Josh Warrington and Gilberto Ramirez against Joe Smith Jr.
And obviously reacting to Canelo and Charlo's fight this weekend, which is a Canelo fight, big star returning to the ring. So for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.